You're mistaken about time at a very basic level. You assume you understand it because you glance at a clock or notice the years piling up on your body. But that isn't time. That's perception, a sensory illusion produced by biology. Most people carry around a comforting metaphor, the idea that time behaves like a river. It flows, it carries you from yesterday to now to tomorrow. You imagine yourself drifting along inside it. That image sounds elegant, but it collapses the moment you examine it. If time really were a river, how fast would it be moving? 1 second every second. That statement is empty. It explains nothing. It's like saying a ruler is 1 ruler long. It adds no insight into how reality actually works. What's really going on is far stranger, far more mechanical and far less poetic than a gentle current. Time does not flow. It doesn't drag you forward. It doesn't shove events along a track. And if you believe you understand time simply because you can count seconds in your head, then you're standing at the edge of a very unpleasant surprise. Begin where the mistake actually forms inside your own head. That's where the misunderstanding takes hold. You assume your inner sense of time is a dependable device. It isn't. It's a tangled, improvised translation system. A rough hack, not a precision instrument. Try a simple test. Sit still and attempt to count 60 seconds silently. Just count. 1, 2, 3. It feels like measurement, but it isn't. What you're really doing is executing a highly personal routine, a custom program your brain happens to use. For many people, that program runs as a voice. You hear yourself counting internally, quietly narrating 1, 2, 3. It's literal inner speech. Interrupt that voice and everything falls apart. Ask them to talk, force them to answer a question, and the count collapses. The mechanism locks up. But here's where things get strange. Some people don't hear a voice at all, nothing verbal. They see something instead. They might visualize numbers sliding past like a measuring tape or an old mechanical counter ticking forward. Click, click, click. If your brain uses that visual counter, you can multitask without effort. You can skim a page, glance at a list, fold laundry, notice textures and patterns, and that internal counter keeps advancing smoothly. The images continue on their own. Someone relying on a counting voice doesn't get that freedom. Try to read even a single sentence, and the timing evaporates instantly. Language hijacks the system and the count disappears. Same 60 seconds, completely different machinery running underneath. This reveals something essential. What you perceive as time moving forward isn't a feature of the universe. It's a construct your brain assembles, a pattern recognition trick it uses to stay oriented. And that construct differs dramatically from one person to another. There is nothing fixed or universal about it. It's a biological illusion. So the moment we start talking about physics, about the universe itself, your internal experience has to be discarded. We have to stop asking how time feels and start asking what it actually does. Physics works differently. It has to be operational. That means it doesn't chase questions like what is the true nature of time. That's a pastime for philosophers who enjoy endless debates over coffee. Physics asks a sharper question. How do we measure it? And the answer is almost embarrassingly plain. Time is just a system for arranging events, nothing more. It's a labeling scheme. Picture a deck of cards laid out in a line on a table. You can say the jack comes before the queen and the king comes after. Nothing is moving. The table isn't sliding anywhere. The cards aren't flowing. The order exists purely because of how they're positioned. Time is the table. Events are the cards. When we say time passes, all we're really doing is scanning the sequence from left to right. This leads straight to the most common and most serious error. You picture time as a container. You imagine the universe as a vast empty box, with time hanging on the wall like a clock, ticking away even if nothing else exists. You assume that if we erased every star, every planet, every atom, every photon, the ticking would continue. Tick, tick, tick. That idea is wrong. That picture belongs to Newton, and it no longer survives contact with reality. Time is not a background stage on which the universe performs. Time is a way of accounting for change. If nothing in the universe changes, if no atoms vibrate, no light travels, no energy shifts state, then time doesn't progress. It loses its meaning entirely. You cannot define a second without something physical to mark it. A pendulum swinging back and forth, a quartz crystal oscillating, a cesium atom cycling through its energy states. Time is not separate from the contents of the universe. Time is a property that emerges from those contents themselves. This is the point where intuition starts to push back. You respond by saying, fine, but time clearly does things. Time makes me age. Time is why the milk goes bad. No, that's a mistake created by language. Time is not an actor. It has no hands. It doesn't sneak into your refrigerator and ruin your food. Bacteria do that. Chemical processes do that. The relentless spread of entropy does that. Time is nothing more than the accounting system we use to keep track of how quickly those processes unfold. Blaming time is like claiming inches constructed a building. Inches didn't lift a single beam. Builders did. Inches only describe where the walls ended up. Time is the measuring stick, not the thing doing the work. Let's take the ruler metaphor one step further, because this is where intuition really starts to crack. If time is just a measuring stick we use to gauge the separation between events, what happens when that measuring stick can bend? That sounds like science fiction, but it isn't. It's something we can measure directly. We once assumed a second was a second everywhere. Put one clock on Earth and another on Mars, and they would tick in perfect sync, tick-tock forever. It feels obvious, it feels unavoidable, and it's completely wrong. The rate at which a clock ticks depends on where it is and how fast it's moving. That difference isn't a flaw in the machinery. Nothing is broken. It's a built-in feature of how reality itself works. Picture yourself driving across an enormous, perfectly flat map. You can head straight north or you can turn and go east. If you drive only north, every bit of your speed is devoted to moving northward. But the moment you turn the wheel and head northeast, that speed gets split. Some of it goes north, some of it goes east. You're still moving just as fast overall, but you're no longer making northward progress as quickly because part of that motion has been redirected. Now swap the labels. Replace north with time, replace east with space. That is the core idea behind relativity. You are always moving through the universe at a fixed total rate. That motion never changes. What changes is how it's divided between space and time. If you're sitting completely still, not moving through space at all, then all of your motion is spent moving through time. You're advancing into the future at the maximum possible rate, 1 second per second. The instant you start moving through space, when you walk across the room or climb into a rocket and accelerate, some of that motion has to be reassigned. You're now spending part of it on space. And mathematically, that means you must spend less on time. Your clock ticks more slowly. Your aging slows down. Nothing is malfunctioning. No rule is being violated. You've simply changed direction on the map. If you could somehow reach the speed of light, the absolute speed limit of the universe, all of your motion would be spent on space. There would be nothing left over for time. At that limit, time shuts off. For a particle of light, time doesn't elapse at all. From its own perspective, it is created and absorbed in the same moment. No waiting, no aging. The universe stands perfectly still. At this point, you might object. You might say, I don't feel my watch slow down when I sprint for the bus. Of course you don't. You're moving far too slowly. On cosmic terms, you're a biological snail. At everyday human speeds, the effect is microscopic. But microscopic does not mean imaginary. It's real enough that we have to account for it. We actually have to build this correction into our technology. Satellites are moving fast enough that their clocks drift away from yours. Their time does not match your time. If we didn't compensate for that difference, systems like GPS would fail almost immediately. We aren't adjusting broken clocks. We're correcting for the fact that motion through space changes the rate at which time itself unfolds. There's another way time deceives us, and it loops back to that sock counting problem. Pattern recognition. We experience time as having a direction, an arrow. The past feels locked in place. The future feels unwritten. You can recall what you ate this morning, but you can't recall tonight's meal. The question is why? Most of the equations that govern physics don't care about direction. They work just as well forward as backward. So if the laws don't prefer a direction, why does your memory? Film a planet circling a star and play the footage in reverse. Nothing looks wrong. Gravity doesn't complain, but film an egg dropping onto the floor and shattering, then reverse the clip, and everyone immediately knows it's fake. The yolk doesn't rise up, gather itself neatly, and zip back into an intact shell. Here's the key insight. This has nothing to do with time itself. It's about likelihood. It's about disorder. Destroying an egg is easy. Constructing one is extraordinarily hard. There are countless ways for an egg to end up broken, smeared across the floor, cracked into a few chunks, pulverized into fragments. But there is exactly one arrangement where it counts as an intact egg. As systems interact and evolve, they almost always drift from states with very few possible configurations toward states with vastly more. That drift has a name, entropy, and that, and only that, is why time feels like it has a direction. You're watching the universe randomize itself. Think of it like a deck of cards. Start with it perfectly ordered. Every moment that passes is just another shuffle. The order fades, options multiply. You can't reverse that shuffle by wishing. Probability doesn't care what you want. What this means is that the feeling of time moving forward isn't you sensing time at all. It's your brain noticing that the universe is getting messier. You function as a detector of disorder. When you tell past from future, what you're really doing is separating states with less chaos from states with more chaos. Imagine a universe pushed all the way to maximum disorder. Everything evenly smeared out. No gradients, no structures, nothing clumping, nothing changing in any meaningful way. In that universe, your brain would have nothing to grab onto. Past and future would blur together. There would be no egg to smash, no contrast to record, no memories to anchor. In a universe at thermal equilibrium where entropy can't increase anymore, the arrow of time disappears. Not because time stopped, but because there's no longer any difference left to notice. So circle back to those people counting in their heads, the ones watching a mental tape slide by, and the ones listening to an inner voice ticking off numbers. Both are doing the same thing. They're forcing a clean, straight line onto something that isn't actually rigid at all. The universe is flexible. Our minds are not. So we invent internal machines to keep things manageable. We do this because we have to. Survival depends on it. You need to know when the predator arrives and when the crops are ready. Evolution trained us to track duration, not to comprehend time as a dimension. Our brains are optimized for usefulness, not for truth. They care about what works, not what's accurate. That's why attention collapses into the present moment. The now is where decisions happen. It's where you act. But in physics, the idea of a universal now starts to dissolve. It turns out to be unstable, context-dependent, and far stranger than intuition would ever suggest. If you and I are standing side by side, our sense of now lines up well enough. Close enough that the difference doesn't matter. But place you on a planet 1,000,000 light years away, and have you move relative to me, and that agreement collapses. Your version of now cuts through the universe at a different angle than mine. Events you label as happening right now could lie in what I would call the future. Things I insist are happening now might already sit in your past. There is no single universal present draped across the cosmos like a sheet. That idea doesn't survive once motion enters the picture. Instead, the universe exists as a complete block of events, a four-dimensional slab, a cosmic loaf of bread, and what you call the present is just a slice through that loaf. How you cut it depends entirely on how fast you're moving. This is difficult to take in. It feels backwards, like being told gravity suddenly points the wrong way. That reaction isn't a flaw in the idea. It's a mismatch of languages. You're trying to translate the universe's highest level description into the crude shorthand of human biology. You're counting socks when you should be tracking light beams. When you force reality to obey intuition, things fall apart. You get contradictions, you get paradoxes. Confusion piles up. But the moment you loosen your grip on what you think time must be, when you stop treating it like a stack of moments and start handling it like a dimension, the math settles down, the equations line up, and all at once the universe stops looking broken and starts looking coherent. We're still not finished. Even if you accept that time behaves like a dimension, even if you accept that it stretches and compresses with motion, there's a deeper problem waiting underneath. We've talked about how time is measured. We've talked about why disorder gives it a direction, but we haven't touched the origin. If time is nothing more than a way to track change, then what happens when you rewind everything to the very start? Run the cosmic film backward until you reach the first frame. As the universe contracts in reverse, it shrinks, it heats up, density climbs, energy piles on energy, and eventually you reach a point where our equations stop behaving. The rules we rely on begin to blur, then break down entirely. The laws of physics don't just fail to answer the question, they start to dissolve. Think about where all of our measuring tools actually live. Every clock, every atom, every orbiting planet, every beam of light exists inside the universe. But if the universe itself came into being in an event we call the Big Bang, does it even make sense to ask what came before it? This is where your revised idea of time gets put to the test. If time is simply a way of arranging events that occur within the universe, then asking what happened before the universe existed may be a category error. It's like asking what lies north of the North Pole. The sentence sounds fine, but the geometry breaks it. There is no further north once you reach the pole. In the same way, there may be no before prior to the beginning of time. Not because the answer is hidden, but because the question itself may have nowhere to point. And yet the itch remains. that inner metronome, that quiet voice still counting 1, 2, 3. We want the universe to have a preface, a long backstory that fades into infinity. The idea that the measuring tape simply begins, that the counter was once switched on, is deeply uncomfortable. This tension sits right at the boundary between how we think and how the universe behaves. Our psychology pulls one way, our cosmology pulls another. We are limited creatures trying to grasp boundless concepts with instruments made of biology and current. Given that mismatch, it's almost miraculous that we manage to understand anything at all. Look back at those patterns. The person picturing a tape sliding by can keep counting while reading because separate circuits are doing the work. One visual, one verbal. They don't collide. Physics evolves in much the same way. Classical mechanics was the verbal loop. It was simple, intuitive, and good enough for everyday motion. Relativity is the visual tape. It handles structures and relationships the old approach simply couldn't manage. What's really happening is a constant software update. We keep rewriting our mental models to better fit the hardware of reality, and that process is never comfortable. It means letting go of ideas that feel natural and beautiful, metaphors we've grown attached to. The flowing river of time is one of them. Here's the quiet elegance of it all. Even though your instincts about time are wrong, even though your inner clock is a biological shortcut, and even though time itself is a stretchy, relative, flexible dimension rather than a rigid tick-tock machine, the system still serves you. You can still boil an egg most days. You can still meet a friend at 2 in the afternoon. Everyday life runs just fine. All the strangeness stays hidden beneath the surface. You don't need to understand how an engine combusts fuel to drive to the store. You don't need to grasp space-time geometry to get through your day. Reality politely does the heavy lifting for you, but knowing it's there changes something. Knowing what's under the hood doesn't stop the car from working. It just makes the ride a little more meaningful. This loops us back to that odd little counting experiment, the split between the people who hear numbers and the people who see them. That difference isn't a novelty. It exposes something deeply unsettling about how understanding actually works. When two people talk about something complicated, time, relativity, love, they assume they're sharing the same mental space. Heads nod. Agreement forms. Someone says, "Yes, I get it." But what's really happening is far stranger. A huge invisible translation process is running in the background. You take my words and transform them into your own internal symbols, images, or sounds. And those internal representations may look nothing like mine. I say 1 minute, and I picture a clock hand sweeping across a dial. You hear an inner voice counting to 60. We land on the same conclusion, so we assume we're aligned. But under the surface, the machinery doing the work is completely foreign. This is why it matters so much in physics. It exposes how fragile common sense really is. Common sense isn't some universal truth. It's just a bundle of assumptions you absorbed early in life. It's built on the private imagery running inside your head. If you picture time as a numbered strip sliding forward, the idea that time can curve will feel absurd. If time lives in your mind as a counting voice, the notion that it behaves like space will feel impossible. So when physics tries to explain things like curved spacetime or the quantum vacuum, it isn't merely adding new information. It's asking for something far more extreme. It's asking you to uninstall your mental operating system, to discard the tape, to mute the voice, and that's why it hurts. That's why resistance kicks in immediately. You aren't just learning new ideas. You're trying to translate reality using tools your own biology was never designed to let go of. So let's push against that biological intuition one more time. We've already talked about clocks slowing down with motion, but that idea carries a consequence that's far more unsettling. It wipes out the notion of simultaneity, the idea that two things can simply happen at the same time. Picture two tall towers separated by miles. You arrange for a light to flash at the top of each one at what you define as the same instant. From where you stand, they go off together. No ambiguity. But now imagine a spacecraft racing past at half the speed of light. From inside that ship, those flashes are not simultaneous. Using flawless clocks and rulers, the observer on board will measure that one flash occurred before the other. So who's mistaken? You or the person on the ship? Neither. Both measurements are correct. The disagreement isn't an error. It's a feature of how time and space are stitched together. This is where intuition finally snaps. We cling to the idea of a shared present. We're convinced that something is happening on Mars right now, as if now were stamped onto the universe itself. But it isn't. The present is not a physical feature. It's a coordinate choice. Change your motion and you tilt the slice. You cut the space-time loaf at a different angle. And by doing that, you literally change which events count as happening together. There is no universal master clock ticking quietly behind the cosmos. No hidden metronome. No privileged viewpoint where everything lines up into a single orderly timeline. There is no cosmic observer watching events unfold in perfect sequence. Depending on how you move, the order of distant events can rearrange itself. Cause and effect usually remain intact. Reality protects that much. But the timing, the notion of when things happen, that part is negotiable. Time doesn't belong to the universe the way you thought it did. If the present depends on motion and time, behaves like a spatial dimension, you're forced into a conclusion that makes the old river metaphor look childish. Physicists call it the block. If time really is a dimension, then past, present, and future don't come into existence one after another. They all exist together. Picture a strip of film. When you watch a movie, it feels like a story unfolding moment by moment. One scene follows the next. But hold the film reel in your hands and the illusion collapses. The final scene exists at the same time as the opening shot. Every frame is already there, fixed in place. Nothing on the reel is moving. The only thing that moves is the beam of light passing through it. In that picture, your awareness is the projector. The events of your life, your birth, your breakfast this morning, your death, are simply frames on the reel. They aren't waiting to happen. They already exist. They always did. This is why physicists sometimes say that time doesn't really flow. They don't mean it's imaginary or unreal. They mean it's a trick of perspective. The dinosaur that died 66 million years ago hasn't been erased from reality. It occupies a different location along the time dimension. That's all. Distance works the same way in space. New York doesn't vanish just because you're not standing in it. It exists elsewhere. The past exists elsewhere too, just in time instead of space. The future sits in the opposite direction. The overall structure doesn't move. It's fixed. What moves is your experience through it. The universe is static. Your awareness is not. At this point, people usually jump to the same question. If the future already exists, do I still have free will? That's the wrong framing. That's philosophy reaching for comfort. Physics asks something else. Is the system predictable? And the answer is complicated. Go back to the egg. Breaking it wasn't about time, it was about entropy. The future points toward more disorder. Even if the block itself is fixed, the patterns inside it obey constraints. Rules still apply. You can't teleport to the final scene because the frames in between aren't optional. They are the mechanism by which that future comes into being. You aren't a tourist sliding along a timeline. You are the process unfolding inside it. You are the chemistry reacting. You are the cards being shuffled. Time isn't carrying you forward. You are what forward looks like. And let's return to that counting experiment one final time because there's a quiet lesson hiding in it about capability. The person who pictured the tape sliding by could do something the voice counter couldn't. They could count and read at the same time. Their mind ran in parallel. Different internal imagery unlocked a different kind of power. Physics does the same thing for you. When you stop forcing the universe into stories about rivers and flowing moments and start seeing it as geometry, as mathematics, as structure, something changes. You gain leverage. Suddenly, black holes' freezing time makes sense. Gravity stops being a mysterious force and turns into a curved map. You're no longer trapped inside the illusion, reacting to it. You step back. You read the map instead of being dragged along by it. And still, some humility is required. We talk about how information is stored, wave functions, exponentials, electric fields. We learn the terminology. We write symbols on a page and convince ourselves we've pinned reality down. But the person sitting next to you may be encoding that same wave function in a completely different way. You might picture a jagged line on a graph. They might imagine a vibrating membrane or a rippling surface. We're all doing the same thing from different angles, like blind people feeling different parts of an elephant and trying to explain it to one another using words that barely stretch far enough. The equations line up, so we think we agree. But beneath that, the mental pictures can be wildly different. Math works, that's the miracle. But it is always a translation, never the thing itself. We discovered that something as simple as counting a single minute falls apart under different methods and distractions. If our perception of 60 seconds is that fragile, imagine how unreliable our intuition becomes when we talk about eternity or origins. We ask how the universe began and we expect a narrative, a beginning, a once upon a time. But the universe doesn't operate as a story. It doesn't work in chapters, it works in configurations, in states, in fields, in relationships that may not even allow for a before at all. We keep trying to treat cosmic questions like household chores as if we can line them up and count them one by one. We're trying to count the universe's socks. But the universe isn't wearing socks. It's busy weaving the fabric they would be made from. So what is time really? Time is the constraint that prevents everything from occurring simultaneously. Time is the slow march toward thermal equilibrium. Time is the bending of the map caused by mass and energy. But above all, time is a mirror. It reflects the limits of the mind trying to grasp it. When you look at a clock, you're not observing time itself. You're looking at a device built to reassure you, a coordination tool for civilization, a way to keep meetings aligned and trains running. Physical time, actual time, is nothing like that. It's unruly. It stretches and compresses. It stalls near black holes. It may not flow at all. The clock isn't showing you reality. It's showing you what your brain needs in order to function. Reality itself is far stranger, less polite, and entirely indifferent to how comforting your measurements feel. If this is uncomfortable, that's the point. The discomfort means your internal translator is failing. It means the smooth surface of common sense is starting to crack. Don't retreat from that feeling. In science, confusion isn't a wall you hit. It's the doorway you step through. It signals that a familiar falsehood is about to be replaced by something harder and truer. Time is not the thing you thought you understood. It never was. It's deeper, stranger, and far less intuitive than any metaphor you grew up with. And the real miracle isn't that time behaves this way. The miracle is that creatures like us, fragile biological devices stitched together from stardust and worry, can uncover it at all.